Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are actually going to get started. So if you are watching now, there's a bit of a lag time between um, what I'm sharing and the YouTube video. Hello, everyone. So what I want to do is I want to encourage you, you can put comments into the YouTube chat if you have questions throughout that you would like me to answer. So I'll have to check it on my phone so that I don't do any mix up with the audio. And you can also feel free to direct message me in the Meetup app if you have questions as I'm going through. So I'm going to start by sharing some information, and then maybe about 15-20 minutes into it, I'm going to check and see if there are any comments or questions that I missed. So let's get started. So if you are new to any of these webinars or lives, my name is Paula Ilochi. I am an intuitive transformation coach. So I have spent about 10 years as a victim advocate. And I then transitioned into coaching on my own. And what I do is I assist individuals who have experienced abusive relationships, be it romantic, family, workplace, or even spiritual in some cases, to set healthy boundaries, build their self-confidence, and really begin to heal loudly, right? Many of us suffer in silence. So I like to say that we suffer silently, but we're healing loudly. So today, what I want to talk about is there a way to grieve a narcissistic relationship in a healthy way? And the answer is yes. I think the reason a lot of people have a hard time grieving a narcissistic relationship is because in your mind, you think, why am I grieving the loss of something that was so terrible? Why am I grieving a person who mistreated me, who wasn't kind to me, who wasn't nice to me, right? So we're battling with ourselves, like, what is it about that behavior that I've experienced that I'm grieving? The first thing you need to understand that you are grieving the loss of a relationship that in your mind should have happened. So what does that mean? If you're here and you're grieving the loss of a romantic relationship, more than likely in your mind, you had an idea of what this family structure, this family dynamic should look like. And you did not experience that. And most of the disconnect comes between what you felt you should have experienced versus what you actually, in fact, did experience. Okay. So, what that means is if you have a child with a narcissistic person, emotionally abusive person, physically violent person, controlling, you might be grieving the fact that you are now doing this on your own. You're now doing the parenting on your own. And you might even be thinking in your mind, how do I prepare my child for this parent? How do I prepare my child to understand that this is who their parent is? This is the behavior that this parent had. And I'm afraid that the parent is not even going to parent our child that we had together. Many of us feel that fear. Or maybe you're grieving a narcissistic mother or father or family member, right? What you're grieving in that moment is a person who you anticipate that person to be, who you expect that person to be. That person is not there. And it's hard to wrap our minds around that type of loss because mostly we kind of feel like we shouldn't be feeling that loss anyway, but it's absolutely normal. One thing that I would like to caution you not to do when you're grieving is to gaslight yourself and say you shouldn't feel that way. Saying things such as, I shouldn't be feeling this way, I should be over it, this person was so terrible, I have no reason to feel anxious or depressed, right? All the stages that come with grief or the loss of a loved one. Because more than likely, you probably did love that person. And just because the person is no longer in your life, just because that person is mistreating you, does that mean you no longer love that person? So acknowledge that the love is still there. That is completely normal. and that it is okay to go through the stages of grief. So stages of grief will look like anxiety, depression. It can show up as high blood pressure, stomach aches, loss of appetite, increased appetite, weight gain, weight loss, right? Not sleeping enough, sleeping too much. All of these things come into grief. And if you're experiencing that, that is completely normal. It is in the moments that we push aside our grief and say, I should not be feeling this way, that that process then becomes unhealthy. Now, obviously, if you're at a point where you've been anxious for a very long time or depressed and it's impacting your day-to-day activities, you want to talk to your primary care provider and see if there's anything that they can assist you with. But what I'm trying to get out to you is that it is completely normal to grieve the loss of a loved one, even if they mistreated you. One other thing to anticipate as you're dealing with the stages of grief is that it can last a while. It can last a while, and there are different triggers you might experience on your journey of dealing with grief. I'll give myself as an example. Many of you guys know my story, that I'm a survivor of emotional, financial, and verbal abuse. Okay. So one thing that I had to recognize that was my trigger is when I'm out at an event with my son. I have a 2-year-old son. And if I see other families, particularly males, playing with their children, having a great time, they're laughing. If we're at the park and I see families together, that is a trigger for me because I am grieving, or I have grieved the loss of the family structure that I thought I had. So in that moment, I had to take a step back and say, what is it that triggers me? What are my triggers? And that's important. That's a very important part to understand in the stage of grief and the process of grieving so that you're not completely thrown off. And yes, of course, there are times when other things will pop up that you didn't even know was a trigger. Be mindful of that, journal that, write that down, take a mental note of what happened in that moment when you felt triggered. And then you can work on that. So in my scenario, I was realizing being around families was a trigger for me. And in that moment, I had to stop and say, okay, but even when I was in that relationship, I didn't have the family that was triggering me. Does that make sense? I still didn't have the family structure that I was seeing in that park, on that playground, at the restaurant. I didn't have that. So I was grieving something that I never even had. And it was also in that moment that I was able to take a step back and say, oh, wow, I created this life. And because you love that person, because you expect them to be an amazing partner, an amazing mom or dad or sibling, right? But then when you start to realize that just like they create their own life, they create their own reality, we created our own expectations of people who didn't stand a chance of ever meeting them. And yes, that feels like a loss because it is a loss. But you can recognize that and understand that it's completely normal. What I like to say is that awareness is so key when healing from a narcissistic relationship, because being aware that that reality was not, in fact, reality helps you in that healing process. So as I said before, I'm going to be sharing different pieces of information. I encourage you, because I cannot see YouTube right now, I encourage you, go to Meetup, and I'm pulling my phone out because I have the Meetup app on here. And if you have questions, comments that you want me to address as I'm sharing this information with you, send me a personal message. If you do write in the YouTube link, I'll just address it after the video has ended, but I'll eventually address it. But like I said, go ahead and send me a message on Meetup if you have questions. So I'm going to pause for a second. I see I have a message here. And no worries, I won't say your name. The reason, and just to go back, the reason that I've moved to doing the live recording as opposed to the Zoom face-to-face is because it allows me to get more information out to you guys without kind of interrupting my train of thought. It allows you to kind of let this sink in as well. And if for some reason you're not here for the live or you've missed the live recording, this is always going to be uploaded after. So for those of you who cannot make the recordings because you have work, you have other things going on, you can always check out the video. So let me see what this is here. Okay, I have the same trigger, someone is telling me. Just the other day, I was at the park with my girls and I had the same feelings. Thank you for validating this feeling. Absolutely. And I want to challenge you to sit back and say, for some people, it might be watching a movie. Some people can't watch certain movies that might remind them of that person who's abused them, right? Some people might find themselves having a hard time listening to a certain song. And you know why that is? Because our body keeps score. So even if in your relationship, you suppressed your feelings, you wanted to believe that it really wasn't that bad. Maybe if I just walk on this eggshell and skip this line, I won't set this person off. But you understand that there was nothing that you could have done to change the outcome of that situation. So leaving was in your best interest. But it does not take away the fact that you still have triggers because now you are free to feel. If you were on the last webinar, we talked about the gaslighting in the terms of you're too sensitive. You can't take a joke, right? That's a term you hear a lot in an emotionally abusive relationship. When you step away, and if you have the luxury to go no contact, you probably experience feelings again because you've been suppressing them, trying to stay in line with the expectation that that person has put out for you, making sure they're okay. If you have children, making sure your children are okay. If you don't have children, making sure that the face you're presenting to people is the face that says, my family is great, we're doing great. Because some of us want to put on the face, and I've done it, that everything was great and everything was awesome, but every night you're crying. You know, you have heart palpitations, you are extremely stressed, you're very emotional, right? Because you weren't allowed to feel. So the moment you step away, you better believe those feelings are going to start rolling in because the body keeps score. And that's something that I talk about in the Healing Loudly 30-Day Transformation course, which I have exciting news about at the end of this, is that for some of us, we get migraines. You know, some people get TMJ. They get your jaw start to lock because you clench. You know, when you're feeling stressed, you start to clench, right? The body is keeping score. So let it out. You have to grieve the loss of it. It's completely normal to grieve the loss. Another thing I want to share, and I see you guys are sending me messages, I'll get to that in a second. Another thing I want to share is that in a romantic relationship, in any relationship with a narcissistic person, an emotionally abusive person, the time spent in that relationship is double that, if not triple that, of an average relationship that's healthy or just has the average relationship problems. What that means is you can be in a relationship with a narcissistic person, an abusive person for 1 year, but feel the damage of someone who's been in a up and down relationship for about 5 or 10, or 2 or 3. The numbers vary depending on the person. So that's why some of us come out of that relationship and we're like, I wasn't even in it with this person long. It was only 2 years, or for some people, it is a long time. But quite a few people will say, we were only together for a few months. How did all this damage happen in just a few months or just a few years? That is because that abuse expedites something in your brain. It expedites that mental, that fight or flight response. And your body stays there. It stays there for an insane amount of time. And when you get away from them physically, because even being around someone, if it's a mother, parent, sibling, it doesn't matter who that abusive person is, being around that person will invoke physical triggers. You will feel physically uncomfortable just being in their presence. So the moment you escape, you go no contact, gray rock method, you're not speaking with them, you're not engaging with them, your body is starting to relax. And when that body starts to relax, the feelings are coming in. So again, it is very, very normal to grieve. So I'm going to take a second here, and I'm going to go ahead and look at some of the the comments that you guys are sending to me. Okay, so someone is saying, having lost a child and having a child with disabilities, I have grieved and survived the loss of dreams and the very real loss of a beloved child. How is it possible that I'm also grieving the loss of the person who was not good to me? Even when we were not together very long. And even though I knew this person was not healthy for me. I've never before suffered over a man like I have over this one. Why is that? Is there something particular about narcissists that do that to us? And I know there's a delay in the information I'm providing and the questions when you guys are sending it. Absolutely. There is an absolute reason for that. And that's because the body is on high alert in a way that it has never been in a healthy relationship. The body is literally in survival mode. Humans, we were not meant, people, animals, we were not meant to stay in survival mode. The purpose of that is to either fight or flee, right? To get away, to alert you of danger. That's a response that the brain is sending messages throughout your body of, okay, something is happening. We have to go. We have to get out of this. But you're staying in that mode when you're in an abusive relationship. So that loss is very, very different than the loss of an average relationship, a healthy relationship. And I'm so sorry, as a mom, I just couldn't imagine the pain that you're feeling with the loss of a child. The interesting thing about that is you love your child, you know your child loves you. And whatever way it takes you to grieve that child, or whatever way it takes you to come to peace with the term that your child has transitioned, has passed on, that's the peace that you're living with, right? On the opposite end, when it's someone who you love, who mistreated you time and time again, but also dangled a carrot in front of you saying, if you can just reach this, I'll treat you better. And you kept trying to get to that carrot, and only for that line, that carrot to keep being removed, your body is keeping score. So what you're feeling is completely normal. It is completely normal to wonder, why am I grieving the loss of someone who was terrible to me? And that in of itself was its own form of grief, because you're also grieving that person who stood up to protect you. So this is what I say to people. We look at ourselves in that relationship. We look back at ourselves and say, how could I have done that? How could I have put up with that? I deserve more. I deserve better. And you did. But also you need to look at that person and say, thank you for standing up for me. Thank you for protecting me. Because that version of you did everything that they needed to do and could possibly think to do in that moment to protect you and get you to this place of healing. So we need to look at our past selves and not belittle ourselves, not look down on ourselves, but really thank ourselves for getting us to this point and for having the strength to get out of it. So begin practicing that as well. So I hope that answered your question. Let me move on to another question here. Someone is just saying, I thought the same thing as you. I thought even when my husband was here, and this is at the park when I use that analogy, I still felt alone because he would just sit there on his phone, not even interact with us or the children. And that's important. You'll start to realize when you think back, I never had that family dynamic that I'm now grieving, and I'm now trying to figure out, how am I going to prepare my children to deal with a narcissistic parent, an emotionally abusive parent, controlling, sometimes physically abusive, right? That person never existed. So when your brain starts to align with reality, the healing begins, right? Let me see what else. Okay. I think I addressed everything. And like I said, please continue to message me if you have questions that you want me to address on this live. Someone else wrote, I won't be able to avoid this person altogether because we're in the same group. How will I get over him and really stop feeling all this pain and hurt? So I'm in the same position as you are. I have a 2-year-old, right? So I have a solid 16, 17 more years and a lifetime ahead to interact. What I suggest in that situation, when you can't go no contact, you do what's called the gray rock method. That's part of the healing process. So what that is you really become as boring as a rock. So the narcissist feeds off of emotions, be it good or bad. So when you're able to control your emotions and only literally talk to that person when it has something to do with your child, and when you're away from them, you can scream, cry, yell, vent, do whatever you need to do. But in that moment when you're talking to them, you're just matter of fact. That's what's worked for me, being very matter of fact. Especially is very frustrating if you're sharing custody and they don't follow the orders, which, they don't follow rules, right? Radically accepting that they are who they are. They're not going to change. They weren't an amazing person in the marriage or relationship. They're not suddenly going to be amazing because you left. But the best thing you can do in this process is start working on your healing part, because when you can control that internal temperature, it doesn't matter what's happening around you. You have to get to the place of being able to control that internal temperature. What does that look like? That looks like intentionally healing. That looks like coming to things such as this and getting information on what you've experiencing, validating what you've experienced, educating you on that, giving you tips and tools to heal. And that's all part of the course that I teach, which is setting healthy boundaries. How do you heal when that person who has mistreated you is not suffering, right? Hollywood tells us that when people mistreat you, something bad happens to them. But what happens when they go on, get remarried, get a new job, get a new house, and you're left to deal with all the rubble? Can you heal in the absence of justice? Unfortunately, they put a lot of their burdens and their problems on you and got you to the point of feeling the grief, the loss, the anxiety. You're dealing with the aftermath. It's now your responsibility to build yourself back up, right? And what that looks like is taking those necessary steps to affirm yourself, to acknowledge what you went through was terrible, to acknowledge that you were strong to get out of that, to acknowledge this person is who they are. They're not going to change. And acknowledge what is it that you can do to protect yourself moving forward. Because I get it, parenting with someone, parallel parenting with a narcissist is very difficult, but it's not impossible. And a lot of that comes from being very flat, very plain. Are you picking the child up on Friday at 6 p.m.? Oh, you can't get our son until Saturday at 4 p.m.? I'm sorry, that goes against the court orders. You cannot do that. Literally, accountability, they hate that. They hate it, but there's nothing that you're doing that's wrong. So many times in our grieving process, we want to be the rule followers, right? We're always the rule followers, whereas they break all the rules, right? And a part of being a rule follower is I still have to bend. There's still that trauma response in us. Okay, he's calling, I have to answer. She's calling, I have to answer. I should just be happy that they're just seeing our child whenever they can, because I don't want that child out. I don't want the parent to not be in our child's life. Acknowledge that you deserve much more, so much more, and that your child deserves so much more, and focus on your healing process. Focus on your healing process. So if you're here, you're on the right track, right? You're making the right steps. So I'm going to take a second and see if there's anything else you guys are, any other questions you have for me. And like I said, if you're watching this, you have other questions, go ahead and send me a direct message and meet up. Another advice I have for you for a healthy way of grieving is surround yourself with an amazing support system. Now is not the time to have friends and family members say to you, I don't even know why you're grieving this. They were a jerk anyway. I don't even know why you're sad or upset. You should be happy that you're out of that relationship. You should be happy that they're no longer controlling you. You should start finding people, you always pick bad people. Now is not the time to hear that when you are grieving, when you are healing. There's really never a good time to hear that, if we're being quite honest. Who are you surrounding yourself with? A lot of times when we get out of a narcissistic relationship, an abusive relationship, and we're taking the steps to heal, we'll start to uncover that there are many other people around us in our close circles who are also abusive. Even if they're well-meaning, it's still not serving you in the right way. So who are you surrounding yourself with in the healing process? One piece of advice, if nothing else you take away from this, one piece of advice I give people is be mindful of the relationships you create when you're healing with an open wound. I'll say that again. Be mindful of the relationships you create when you're healing with an open wound. When you're in that vulnerable state, a lot of times whoever is being nice to us or who seems to be caring will kind of latch onto that. Take a step back and observe and acknowledge that you have what it takes to be discerning and to be intuitive and to trust that gut instinct if someone is giving you advice that's good for you or if someone is just trying to be the new controller. So it's very important to be mindful of these relationships that you're creating while you're healing. Because if you're not careful, it'll keep setting you back in that process. Now, understand the stages of grief. The healing process is cyclical. It's not linear. So there are times where you feel like you've gotten far. There are other times where you feel like you're starting all over again. It's very normal. It's completely normal. But be mindful of who you have alongside you during this journey towards healing. Okay. So I'll take a moment again before wrapping up here to see if there are other questions you guys have for me. I hope you guys are enjoying this. I hope you're getting some good information. Okay, I think I've answered all the questions here. And again, if you're commenting on YouTube, when I end the live, I'll check out the YouTube and I'll respond to that. So if you're new to this site, to YouTube or this channel, go ahead and subscribe, because that way when I respond to you, you'll get notified that I've responded to you. So I just wanted to provide a few healthy ways to grieve, how to acknowledge what you've dealt with, what you've gone through, and recognizing those triggers and understanding that the relationship that you are grieving is one that you wish you would have had, one that you deserved to have, but one that you just couldn't quite get to, right? Because it takes two people in that relationship. They have to be participants in being healthy as well and contributing to that relationship. So if you're liking this information, I want to say that the exciting news I wanted to share is I have a course and I've been promoting it. I've been talking about it in the different meetups, and I know a few of you guys have signed up, so I'm excited for that. The course is divided into modules. So the great thing about it is I've decided to make enrollment now rolling. So what that means is you don't have to start. We're starting this week with module 1. You don't have to start on this week if you can. If you need to start next week, that's fine too. You could drop in. There are 4 total modules, so it'll be a 4-week commitment whenever you do join. But it'll be an amazing way to really hone in on the steps of healing, the steps to releasing pain, the steps into stepping into the life that you are deserving of. Life is not over because you now have a child with a person who's abusive. Life is not over. As I said before, I have a 2-year-old. There were moments I didn't want to get out of bed. There were moments I didn't think that I wanted to even be here, right? It's painful. And it's a pain that's very hard to describe to someone who has never experienced an abusive relationship. That pain is very difficult to describe. But now it has happened. We're moving into the so what. What do we do now? What are the next steps? How do you move forward? So if you're interested in that, definitely message me. I'll give you more information about that. But like I said, let me check one more time before I get off this live to see if I missed anything. I think we're all caught up. Awesome. So thank you all for listening. Thank you guys all for tuning in. Again, like I said, make sure you subscribe so you can get notifications of any comments that I've addressed. And also when you can rewatch this. If you've missed the beginning part, you joined in later, you can go back and rewatch it. So I hope you guys learned some great valuable information. I look forward to sharing more information with you guys as time progresses. So everyone